Orange and blue today. Andrew Mason here, still on the road, headed back to Denver. Fortunately, it hasn't stopped raining even since Sunday. So I've seen enough rain. I'm ready to get back to Denver, ready to keep talking about the Denver Broncos and ready to dive into the aftermath of this 10-9 win on Sunday that pushed the Broncos to 2-2. And diving into the aftermath is a reason why when I was on the conference call, the media conference call with Sean Payton this morning for Denver area media, I wanted to ask him about sacks. Bo Nix has not been sacked in the last 2 games. He was sacked only 4 times in the first 2 games, 2 each. So that's actually not bad, better than last year for the Broncos. But the last 2 weeks, no sacks. And so think about this for a moment. Until the Tampa Bay game, the Broncos had allowed at least 1 sack in 57 consecutive games. So not only they end that streak, then they started a streak of games without a sack. And of course, this is relevant to discuss because a significant reason why Russell Wilson is no longer here, no longer the Broncos quarterback, is because of his sack rate, in particular, the sacks that he caused by drifting and spinning into them. So that's why when Sean Payton was taking questions this morning, I asked him about having no sacks allowed in the last couple of games and whether that was more on Bo Nix or more on the protection. And here's what Sean Payton had to say.
Probably a little both. I think the sack statistic, by and large, is more a quarterback statistic than an offensive line statistic. There's some quarterbacks that are more difficult to protect forward, some that aren't. We saw all the time on college tape, he was someone that got rid of the ball. It become frustrating to rush, if you will, because of his ability to throw it away or to flush and find an answer or an incompletion. But it's something that he's done well throughout his career. And then certainly the offensive line. I mean, that's a pretty good front we just played. There were a handful of matchup concerns, protection issues that we discussed. And, if you said to me when the game ended he was not going to have any sacks and Aaron would have 5, I would have felt that was a little challenging.
And he pointed out there, Aaron Rodgers sacked 5 times by the Broncos. That's another part of the story. Dealt more with that on Sunday when I did my post-game video from MetLife Stadium talking about the team finding its identity as a pressure defense, which if you go all the way back to June when I chatted with Zach Allen at the Healthy Swings event organized by Cortland Sutton over at Coors Field, Zach Allen talked about the pressure packages that Vance Joseph was bringing in, the simplification of the defense, and getting more back to what had worked for Vance Joseph during some of his more successful times when he was the Arizona Cardinals defensive coordinator. Of course, he was there for 4 seasons before moving on to Denver in 2023. So that storyline is there. But the protection of Bo Nix and Bo Nix's role in that, he does get the ball out quickly. I mean, the decisions aren't always great, but they are quick decisions. And then the ability to escape. I mean, you look last week in the game against Tampa Bay when he escapes the sack late in the third quarter and takes off for a run. All of it comes into play here in showing why Bo Nix is not having those negative plays that knock the offense off schedule. This doesn't mean the Broncos offense as a collective is as effective as you want it to be. Let's make that clear. It's an offense that had 1 touchdown this game, 2 touchdowns against Tampa Bay. The rest was field goals from Will Lutz. No touchdowns against Pittsburgh. 1 touchdown in the season opener against Seattle. This is still an offense that has a lot of work to do, but you see signs of improvement and signs of where it can go. The ability of Bo Nix to not take sacks in the way that Russell Wilson did. That's a building block for when everything else comes into play. Another building block is, of course, how you go out there and run the football, and that was something the Broncos did well. And as I was watching Jaleel McLaughlin and Javonte Williams run the ball during Sunday's win and show more burst, more effectiveness. I mean, Javonte Williams showed more burst than we've seen of him since he came back from that knee injury last year. And so it had me flashing back to something that Joe Lombardi, Broncos offensive coordinator, said last week about kind of sticking with what they had, and eventually those runs were going to come. His patience paid off on Sunday with the best dual game from Jaleel McLaughlin and Javonte Williams, probably that they've had together since being paired up in the backfield last season.
I don't know if there's a specific step you have to take. I mean, we obviously Tyler got in there and had the big run, and he's a guy that we really like. But the run game's one of those things where not every run's going to be a 20-yard gain, and you stick with it. I think you know the players that you have. Just because the stats are telling you that they're not gaining a bunch of yards doesn't mean that they've all of a sudden turned to crap. So you just keep handing them the ball and know that we'll keep getting better, and the plan will keep getting better, and we'll keep blocking better, and their big runs are coming. So it's just like anything. It's tempting when you've run the ball a few times early and you're not gaining yards to just say, well, the heck with this, we're going to just start throwing. And the run game is one of those things that if you stick with it, you're going to start busting some runs. And so it's just a patience thing, and obviously just getting better when we do run it.
Certainly they were better, and certainly they were patient. They ran the ball more in the second half than the first half against the Jets. The conditions got better, of course, in the second half, which facilitated more offense for both the Jets and the Broncos. The Broncos were better able to take advantage of it. But watching Javonte Williams knife through those holes, there were moments where for the first time, really since he came back in a game, he said, okay, that's the Javonte that we know. Maybe even a different Javonte than you knew before, because, of course, he did lose the weight in the offseason after he looked slow and sluggish during OTAs, encouraged to drop some pounds in the interim between OTAs and training camp, and he did just that. One thing was also certain with Javonte. He won the team's Head Block Courage Award last year. Tells you how well thought of he is in that building and how well regarded he is by teammates. And it wasn't a surprise that some, like Garrett Bowles, were really happy to see how Javonte did on Sunday, and what, in my opinion, was his best game since coming back from the injury.
He's a special back. He has ability to be one of the best in the league. But we needed to open up holes and show his talent. That's what we did today. And I'm just grateful for, I'm grateful for Ben, Luke, Quinn, Palcho, everybody that we had up front. We just grinded it out, and our backs found the running lanes, and they hit the holes, and we did what we needed to do today.
Garrett Bowles shouting out the offensive line, including Alex Palczewski, who for a second straight game held his own at right tackle. And I'm sure this is not a live show, but I wouldn't be surprised if in the live comments when this show fires, there are people talking about the play of none other than Alex Palczewski and saying, oh, that's a factor in no sacks allowed over 2 games. Certainly it is a factor, but based on what Sean Payton said in that comment that I shared from earlier in the program, I think Sean Payton believes it's more about Bo Nix and what he can do to make quick decisions, have good feel for the pass rush, get the ball out. All things that he liked about Bo Nix coming into this process. Orange and Blue today, still here on the road, heading back to Denver this evening. Boy, oh boy, I'm looking forward to being back in the Mile High City. It's been a long time away following the Broncos on this East Coast jaunt, but a successful East Coast jaunt, winning both games. The preparation, of course, for the first game of this 2-game road swing was fairly normal, taking place in Denver before the Broncos left a little bit early, leaving on Friday rather than Saturday to get down to Tampa. But then, of course, last week they go off to the Greenbrier in West Virginia. You probably watched some of the shows that Cecil Lamb and I had from out there in West Virginia as we dodged the raindrops. The Broncos got into relatively normal practices and then, of course, had the day where they were forced onto the tennis and pickleball courts on Friday. Certainly didn't seem to affect them, but a few players in the locker room did talk about the bonding. Malcolm Roach said they did all sorts of stuff, bowling, arcade, a lot of time spent talking to each other. So when you're in a tight game, how much does that bonding, that chance to be together on the road where you're just leaning on each other, you're not going home to your families at the end of the day, you're just hanging out with the guys, how much that actually did help? Did it make a difference in a game that was decided by 1 point? I mean, you can go through a lot of things, and I would say probably one hand washed the other on the missed field goals at the end of the game. But where did the week at the Greenbrier rank in terms of factors that led to the Broncos escaping with a win that not many people outside of that Broncos locker room thought they were going to have? That was something that Sean Payton discussed this morning.
Well, generally speaking, when you win a game, there's probably 30, 40 different factors. I thought how we tackled helped us win. I thought our ability to run the football in the second half helped us win. Do I think it made more sense for us to stay on the Eastern time zone and have less travel? Yes. And so now, where does that rank into all the other? But I think that it's not an unusual schedule. In fact, it's fairly unusual we hadn't done that. There are a lot of teams, San Francisco, if you get 2 East Coast games and if it makes sense. And so, if that comes up again, we'll figure out the location. But it just reduces the travel, and then it's better for sleep, and then it's better for schedule. And look, all off season, we didn't play well. One of the things Greg and I talked about relative to this upcoming schedule, how do we play better on the Eastern time zone? And you just have to look at that and maybe think outside the box. So it could have been the Greenbrier, it could have been it was important it was in the Eastern time zone. So do I think it was one of the 30 things maybe that helped? Yes.
It was all about the time zone, indeed, being in the Eastern time zone for the Denver Broncos. That's what Sean Payton came back to. He did bring that up last week, that he didn't want to go from the East Coast to Denver and then back to the East Coast. Of course, I mean, it's also worth noting that the issue of going from the East Coast back to Denver, back to the East Coast, you did request that. The Broncos and Sean Payton did request the back-to-back East Coast games rather than just having them spread all over the schedule. So it is sort of a problem that you kind of created, but at the same time, then you have fewer cross-country trips over the course of a season. I do get that. It has been said, I've read some studies that say that usually for every hour you change time zone-wise, it takes a day to fully adjust. So in other words, if you're going 2 hours to the Eastern time zone, it's usually 2 days until you're fully adjusted to that, which actually would lend itself to playing when they went to Tampa Bay last week, flying on Friday rather than Saturday, because then on the second day that you're finishing your adjustment, you're playing the Bucs. Whereas if you flew in the day before, then you're still in the middle of adjusting that. And especially true for a 1 p.m. Eastern time, 11 a.m. Mountain time kickoff. The kickoff is at 4:25 Eastern time, 2:25 Mountain. In theory, there's not a lot of adjustment that you have to do. You can kind of keep yourself on Mountain time almost. I mean, shoot, you can just use the blackout curtains that you have in most of the hotels at which the Broncos would be staying at, and you can simulate darkness no matter what. So there are things you can do, but they won, And next year, looking over the horizon, the Broncos are going to have road games in Washington, in Philadelphia, in Indianapolis, and against an AFC East team to be determined based on the standings. So that's 4 games that they're going to have on the East Coast. Could have another couple of early games in the Central Time Zone, Kansas City, Houston, but that's not really something you're concerned about in this calculus. You're concerned about the Eastern trip. So would not at all surprise me if when the schedule is being put together, the Broncos put in a request to have a couple of those Eastern games back to back. And perhaps it's the Greenbrier, perhaps it's somewhere else, but the Greenbrier seems to be a happy place for Sean Payton. I think if he had his way, if you gave him the truth serum, he'd say he'd love to be at the Greenbrier for a few days every year. He had 3 New Orleans Saints training camps there. He talked about it a few times last week, his role in designing that sports performance center, which appears to have everything an NFL team really needs, except for an indoor practice facility. But they adapted. Broncos showed some adaptability on Friday. They showed some adaptability on Sunday when they went out and beat the New York Jets. And, of course, that adaptability is part of what I think is making this team's identity, the ability to change things on the fly, to respond to adversity, bounce back. And that's something you heard from a bunch of players in the locker room. We'll start first with PJ Locke.
Man, resilient, grit, just willing to play in any conditions. Just super focused. Don't matter what the distractions are, and just coming out on top. That's us.
Super focused, doesn't matter what the distractions are. And of course, we had the comment from PJ Locke on the Friday show talking about the week at the Greenbrier. At one point, he just called it, quote, the place, unquote. So I think on Friday when the Broncos were practicing on a tennis/pickleball court, you had a lot of players that weren't quite sure, is this really something we should be doing? Is this really something that we're buying into? But then you go through the fire and the rain against the Jets on Sunday. You pull out a game at the end, a game where your offense was completely ineffective for an entire half. And you see some tangible evidence. It is really all about the results, as the cliche goes. It's the results-based business in the NFL. It's all about the final result. And the final result is at the end of the week, the Broncos got a win, got a huge win for all their schlepping up the East Coast and flying into Greenbrier Valley Airport, and then on Friday not flying out of there as scheduled, instead flying a 747 out of Roanoke, a little farther down the road, taking a longer bus trip. They adapted, and there they are sitting at 2-2. I'll give credit to Cease. He had them at 2-2 after the first month. I had them at 1-3. I also had them getting hot in October. So did Cease. We're about to find out if that's going to happen with the Raiders and Chargers coming in. One thing I think the Broncos are hoping to do is continue to be resilient when, as the cliche goes, they get punched in the mouth. Here's what Garrett Bowles had to say.
Sometimes you just got to punch them in the mouth, man. That's just what it is, and that's what we needed to do. But that's what we're capable of doing on this team, man. From the special teams to the defense holding their own, to the offense to just controlling the tempo and just grinding it out, and knowing some things. The meter doesn't always go your way. You got to control the meter, and it was swinging pretty good back and forth, but. Finally we settled in, and we put a drive together, and it was one of the most important drives in the game, and I'm just very proud of this team.
They get punched in the mouth, but they deliver a punch in the mouth. It's part of being a physical team that will win games that, frankly, a lot of previous Broncos teams did not know how to win. A little more on how these sorts of things help create the makings of a good team from Malcolm Roach, defensive lineman, who also spoke yesterday.
The making of a good team, you got to find a way to win the close games, the ugly games. And, we stuck with our formula, what we preached all week, how we were going to win the game, and we stuck with it, and it ended up coming to fruition.
Indeed, it was close, and it was ugly. Nothing pretty about this one. There was a little bit of prettiness to the Tampa Bay win last week. The Broncos coming out, attacking on offense on that first series. But this one, in the rain, all that was missing was mud because, of course, MetLife Stadium has artificial turf. So no mud, no grime, just a wet football. Aaron Rodgers running around trying to escape a furious pass rush, and the Broncos having just enough. They were far from perfect, so were the Jets, but the Broncos in the end had just a little more, with their touchdown being the difference in a 10-9 win. That's it for Orange and Blue today. Cecil and I will both be with you on Tuesday when I get back to Colorado. We're going to dive a little more into the defense. I'm going to dive into the performance of Justin Sternad, who came off the bench, made his first defensive start since October of 2021, got involved immediately, making a huge play right there out of the jump as when he was called on for a blitz and he got the sack of Aaron Rodgers. So what's next for him, especially with the Broncos bringing Quan Alexander and Zach Cunningham on the practice squad? Certainly they're going to want to get those veterans up to speed and see what they can do. What is Justin Sternad doing with his audition so far? Pretty good work as those older veterans get ready on the practice field. Hopefully we'll get a chance to catch up with them back in the locker room, back for a normal week covering the Denver Broncos. So with Cease on assignment, this is Mace saying take care. Thanks for watching. And, of course, do the YouTube things. Like, comment, share, subscribe. Hit that notification bell so that you never miss a vid. I'm Mace. Thanks for rolling with us during this wild week and a half traveling all over the East Coast. And I'll talk to you next time from Denver. Bye-bye.